Okay, everyone. Looks like things kind of starting to stabilize here. Welcome. Happy St. Patrick's Day, and we're in for a great treat today. I'm joined by two great speakers, folks that are experts in their area. We've got Heather Vosberg, Dennis Holland. Heather, good morning. Why don't you introduce yourself to the audience, a little bit about you and what you do for the company?
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Eric. My name is Heather Vosberg, and I am on Corteva's nitrogen stabilizer account manager team. So I work alongside our retail customers and our growers to help support our nitrogen stabilizer portfolio of products. I live up actually in Northwest Indiana, but cover a geography of both the northern parts of Illinois and Indiana.
Thanks, Heather. And Dennis, please.
You bet. My name is Dennis Holland. I'm a market development specialist for Corteva, and my geography is Southern Iowa. So I support the Southern Iowa crop protection team from the standpoint of technical service and agronomic expertise. I live here in East Central Iowa.
Very good. Very good. I know a lot of us here at Corteva during the winter months, like a lot of you all, you're traveling, you're seeing a lot of things. Let's kind of hear what Heather and Dennis have been seeing out there. What are some of the things you're hearing from growers right now, Heather, in your part of the world?
Yes, I think before heading into this prepay season and even today, I think we're hearing a lot about volatile nitrogen prices. And that's getting growers to think about, when to take position, if not already, what that's going to look like for spring applications. But I'll make a comment on that real quick is what I often tell customers is, the fact of the matter is that nitrogen loss is expensive no matter the price per ton. So whether it's $500 a ton or $900 a ton, losing it's expensive. So I would say that's a big one that I am having conversations in the field right now.
And Dennis, what are you hearing over in your part of the world right now?
Yeah, a lot of similar conversations that Heather mentioned. Also hearing a lot about the commodity pricing and where things are at for 2026. And I think what I caution guys is it's 2026 is going to be a very important year financially for a lot of guys. And we just got to make sure we're making the right decisions and not setting things up for, to have to manage some more problems going forward in 27 and beyond. So, it's going to be a tough year. We're going to give you some things here in this webinar to hopefully to think about and set 2026 up for a successful year.
Great, great. Folks, we've got a lot of different topics we're going to talk about here this morning. One thing I do want to draw your attention to is typically at the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A function. Please go ahead and type any of your questions in. We're going to break this up into some stabilizers, talk about some herbicides. So I encourage you, if you have a question on a given topic, go ahead and type it in, and we're going to take some breaks throughout this presentation or this webinar and try to answer those. Heather, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you and talk to us a little bit about nitrogen management.
Yes, thanks, Eric. So I feel like what we just talked about is a perfect transition to dive into the importance of protecting our nitrogen applications this spring with N-Serve and Instinct. So, it's important to note that without stabilizing, we have the potential to lose upwards of 20 to 40% of applied nitrogen, depending on conditions. So this is a risk management tool going into the season. So here I wanted to show you all, these are the 7 wonders of the corn yield world by Dr. Fred Below. You may have seen it before. So this is here where he's ranked the most influential factors that affect yield, with number 1 being weather, something that's completely uncontrollable to all of us. But number 2 is something we do have more control over, and that's nitrogen. We can control the right, putting on the right rate for that crop and that soil type, along with a proven nitrogen stabilizer to keep it in place. So this just shows how important it is to get the nitrogen part of the equation correct, and that this is said about setting the foundation up, setting the foundation of our corn crop up for success. So I want to take a step back to explain a little of the behind the scenes of why stabilizing with N-Serve and Instinct is so important. So we know that plants absorb both ammonium and nitrate forms of nitrogen. Ammonium is positively charged, so we consider this a more stable form of nitrogen because it attracts to that negatively charged soil particle, where nitrate is negatively charged, and it's a less stable form of nitrogen because it's effectively, you could say, repelling the negatively charged soil particles. So ammonium is crucial for early crop growth for many species, but we know that a combination of both of these, ammonium and nitrate, is going to improve overall plant growth and health. So there are some theories out there that nitrate is more readily available or easier for uptake, but once in the plant, nitrate is ultimately converted to ammonium, which really is an energy consuming process. So to sum this up, as you guys are well aware, nitrogen is an essential nutrient for plant growth and yield. And that takes us to the nitrogen cycle for a little refresher on nitrification. So this is the biological process where nitrogen in the stable ammonium form is converted to the unstable nitrate form. So this nitrification cycle is affected by a few different factors, but primarily soil temperature and moisture. They are going to speed this process up. So the unstable nitrate then, once that conversion process happens, that is then in turn subject to leaching and denitrification. So although nitrogen loss can occur both above and below ground, the majority of loss is going to occur below ground through these two forms of denitrification, which that's the loss of nitrogen to the atmosphere in the form of greenhouse gas. So this occurs when soils are flooded, causing anaerobic conditions. Leaching, which might be what we all think more often of when we think about nitrogen loss, this is the loss of nitrate to the soil below the plant root zone due to rain and irrigation. So we had just mentioned how soil temperature and moisture really play effect into that nitrification process. So here's a chart on the left-hand side that I want to show you all that's really helpful just to showcase how quickly that process can go. So when you think about this, when soil temperatures are 70 to 80 degrees, that nitrification process is happening within 6 to 9 days. So within a matter of a week, that nitrogen or that ammonium nitrogen can already be converted to nitrate. So we are asking our nitrogen to be available and hang on for quite a while through the toughest conditions. It's the wettest and warmest months of the year. It's a perfect storm for nitrogen loss. I'll stop there, and I want to ask Dennis, Eric, anything you want to add here?
Well, I think it's important to, when you look at a chart like this, you can see that nitrogen, like you said, that nitrogen loss mechanism really does ramp up in April, May, and June when you get those warmer weather, and also, chances for much higher precipitation here in the Midwest. Really important for spring, spring stabilization.
Absolutely.
Heather, I think one of the things that it kind of probably shocks me a little bit, probably shocks the audience is, for that grower out there that might be applying just, maybe UAN or maybe it's anhydrous ammonia 10 days prior to planting. By the time that corn crop's up, based off this chart, that's already in a leachable form. And you think about the economics right now, that's something we've got to definitely pay real close attention to. That, to me, that was one that really drove home for me.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you, Eric. So let's dig a little bit deeper into those two forms of nitrogen loss I mentioned. So denitrification, this again is when soils become waterlogged and oxygen is excluded and there's that anaerobic decomposition of nitrate occurring. I think it's also important to note that ponding of water is not necessary for soil to be waterlogged. So we could have a very, very wet spring. I'd say historically, we are getting bigger rain events in the spring and throughout the summer, more so than we're getting that nice quarter-inch, half-inch of rain. And so we very well, this spring, we've seen it last year, where we can have a lot of rainfall and that soil is going to be waterlogged and sitting there for quite a while. So here's the statistics on this. 10% of that nitrate nitrogen can be lost in 3 days of saturated soils. And then after that, we can lose an additional 10% each day that the soil stays saturated. So if we have a wet year this spring and you've got 5 days of very wet, saturated soils, we have the potential to lose 30% of our nitrate nitrogen just in those 5 days. You think about how long into the season, like Eric mentioned, that we need that nitrogen to be available long throughout tassel, throughout grain fill, and think about how much we can lose so early in season. So that's denitrification. Then we look at leaching. And the stats on this are we can have 1 inch of rainfall that can move nitrates as much as 12 inches down in coarse textured sandy soils. Another thing to consider is that tile drains fields can also contribute to leaching here. So I don't think anybody wants to realize mid or late season that their corn crop is running short on nitrogen. So we all know just how detrimental that can be. And here in this picture on the right, you'll see that classic firing that we've all come across or we are well aware of and want to avoid. And when we run short on nitrogen, a lot is at stake. So you look at this list here, and if we're short on nitrogen, we can see an increase in root disease incidence, weed pressure, as well as a decrease in moisture utilization, nutrient uptake, ultimately yields, test weight. It's what really matters at the end of the day. And protein, and ultimately profits. And so that's the thing, guys. Using N-Serve and Instinct, this is about protecting margin. That's what I want you to think of when you go into this season using a nitrogen stabilizer. And that's where N-Serve and Instinct come into play. So these products are acting to slow down that bacteria that converts ammonium to nitrate in that nitrification process. So we are keeping nitrogen in that ammonium form longer. These products are working below the soil surface, protecting against our biggest forms of loss. So we see an additional 6 to 8 weeks of nitrogen availability in the soil. We have statistics showing that we have 16% less nitrogen leaching, which when you put that into real world terms, that's 21 million pounds of nitrogen being prevented from entering waterways annually. That adds up. And we also know that we have 51% fewer greenhouse gases when N-Serve and Instinct are used, which is equivalent to 3 million tons of CO2. But the key here in 2026, I think, is in that last statistic, is 28% greater soil retention. We have got better soil holding capacity with N-Serve and Instinct, meaning less dollars are being washed down the drain. And I also want to note that these statistics are unique to these two products. No others on the market can claim this same thing. And we are celebrating 50 years of N-Serve and Instinct this year. And we are really proud that we have the same effectiveness that we did day one 50 years ago to today here in 2026. And there's not many products that can make that claim. Dennis, Eric, I'll open up to you. Anything to add there?
I think when you look at one other thing that I've noticed over the years, and guys, run a little bit short of nitrogen, is also just, plant intactness, stalk quality, things like that. And that can just slow down your harvest efficiency as well. So that is another key thing that, managing nitrogen and making sure you have enough out there and have it stabilized so it's there season long can really help with your stock strength and crop integrity at the end of the season.
Heather, I was kind of thinking about when you said 50 years, we've been the gold standard for 50 years. And some folks may say, well, I want some newer technology. Well, when you've got the gold standard and for 50 years we've been there, just like you still use atrazine for 50 plus years, you've been using diesel fuel for 50 plus years, your tractors, it's now become a mainstay for a lot of growers, just something they rely on each and every year for their operation.
Absolutely. And I would say if any of you have questions on other nitrogen stabilizer products and how they compare to N-Serve and Instinct, please ask your local Corteva territory manager, ask your retailer, your retail partner, because we'd love to get you more information to just help build your confidence that these are the gold standard, like Eric said. Perfect, guys. Thank you. So more of you might be familiar with N-Serve, and it's a formulation for anhydrous ammonia, but the same proven active ingredient is available in Instinct NXTGEN, which is formulated for UAN, urea, and manure. So no matter what nitrogen form you're applying this spring, we have got a solution to protect your nitrogen. So we continue to trial these products year in and year out to continue building that confidence in their performance. So we wanted to show you just last year's results. So we saw an average of an 8 bushel per acre increase in spring applications and a 5 bushel per acre increase in side dress applications. So this is very consistent year over year. And what I also want to highlight here is obviously this adds up to significant dollars. So here you can see 8 bushel at $4 corn price. That's $32 an acre. And we talk about with our trial work over the past 50 years, we have an 82% win rate with these products. So when you think about going into a maybe tougher economic year like 2026, I feel very confident in investing, or we could say placing our bets on a product's ROI that returns 82% of the time. So want to just show you here is that each and every year we're seeing consistent results. So here's another trial. I think this is a great visual to see the proof of when N-Serve is applied. So you've got the left side of the field here where I should start by saying you've got 160 pounds of anhydrous ammonia applied across the entire field. And on the left side and on the right side, you've got N-Serve made with that application versus straight down the middle with no stabilizer. And this is just the proof in the pudding that you can see that visual difference of what's going on in the field when N-Serve is in the tank. This is another trial that we really like to showcase here, showing the average nitrogen content in draining systems. And so this is showing that in a field here where we've got an unstabilized treatment and then where we've got a treatment with Instinct NXTGEN, after taking water samples throughout June 15th through July 3, so a 2-3 week span there, we saw a 24% reduction in nitrogen leaching compared to the unstabilized acre. And so at the end of the day, yield, right? These products have to yield. That is important. But this is what's going on. This is showing you what's going on below the soil surface, that these products are doing the work, even though we might not be able to see it. Okay, so that wraps up what we wanted to discuss with you and share with you on the nitrogen stabilizer topic. Dennis, Eric, anything to add there?
Yeah, I really think that that last slide you showed is something that's getting more and more talked about here in Iowa with nitrates winding up in some of the surface waters. Where a lot of that tile drainage water goes. So, that trial was really interesting. The nitrogen went on at planting time, and then they were finding reduced nitrates all the way into July from the stabilized drainage water. So, from the water coming out of the stabilized nitrogen plots. So, I just think it's a really, really good reminder and a good way to measure what Instinct can do. And I think those trials also showed, increased yield about 10 bushels per acre in that plot there where they had the stabilized nitrogen. So not only bringing the farmer the value and the yield, but also, an environmental benefit as well.
Absolutely.
Folks, I just want to remind everyone, if you have questions on the stabilizer component, we're going to go ahead and take some questions now. I'll start with you, Heather. I've had the opportunity to kind of travel back and forth to India a lot here over the last few months. So I've seen it go spring, back to winter, spring to winter, 3 or 4 times, I think, in the past 2 months. We'll be 80 again here this weekend. I know as we get closer to planting, growers are more reluctant maybe to stabilize that nitrogen versus now. We still got a couple months maybe for planting, but why is it important in your mind to be stabilizing kind of all year long?
I would say going back to that major factor of we don't know what the weather's going to bring. And so we don't know if we could make that nitrogen application right close to planting or even at side dress, and we can have some of our largest weather events of the season putting our nitrogen at major risk of loss. So when we think about stabilizing, even now in early spring, the majority of that protection from that active ingredient is we are going to be utilizing May and in June here. And so that's the thing is making an application right around planting or even later, we are in a crucial time because if you remember that days to nitrification chart, that nitrification process is happening so quickly once those soils are warmed up that, later on in spring. I think it's one of those things we talk about how this is an insurance policy year in, year out, that we don't know what the weather is going to bring. But when we use this as a consistent part of our management program, it's going to pay year in and year out.
Yeah. Dennis, I know a lot of growers, you start getting those flat black soils like you're accustomed to here in Iowa. And I kind of almost call it the Ron Potpourri effect. You just plant it, forget it, and get 200 bushels. We're so fertile. Why is it still important to really make sure you're stabilizing those productive soils as well?
Well, I think it boils down to the, getting back to the rainfall, and those heavy black soils can sit saturated when we do get those heavy rains. You're not going to get much leaching. And here in Iowa, I'd say most of our nitrogen loss is due to denitrification rather than leaching. So in those situations, I do think it's a good idea to stabilize, keep it in the ammonium form. Remember, the plant can still use that form. It's not like there's any detrimental effect to using N-Serve or Instinct in those situations. You're just slowing down that process to where the nitrogen goes from ammonium to nitrate and is subject to loss. So in those type of soils, it's still important to keep it stabilized and keep it in the ammonium form as long as you can.
Well, Heather, yes, we got a few questions here. The first question here is, can you explain the benefits of Instinct NXTGEN and a Y drop application versus using, say, ATS or Agritain Ultra or some other similar product?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. So absolutely, when you're thinking about Y dropping, there's risk and there's concern of that nitrogen sitting on top of the soil surface. But one thing I probably forgot to mention is when you think about nitrogen loss as a whole, 70% of all the nitrogen loss that we can experience is going to occur below ground through leaching and denitrification. The other 30% is that volatilization. That's where if you really have concern about volatilization, maybe an Agritain and NBPT product could be beneficial. But I go back to that statistic of 70 versus 30. So even after a Y drop application, if we get some heavy rains within the week, you're then no longer at risk of volatilization. We're at risk for leaching and denitrification once that nitrogen is worked in. And I go back to, do we want to protect the 70% or the 30%? And probably 8 times out of 10, I'm going to want to protect that larger majority, that 70%.
Yep. We've got another question here, and I think it really stems from, you talk about regenerative ag, how we're trying to make our soils more productive, healthy. How does, I'm going to say Instinct and N-Serve in this case, impact soil biology and microbes?
Yes. So I'm glad you bring that up because there is a lot of attention in that space, which is all good things to look at. I think it's really important to walk away and remember here that the active ingredient in N-Serve and Instinct is specifically affecting the nitrous amonis bacteria, which that bacteria is specific to that nitrification process. And so at the rates we're using, this active ingredient is only going to affect nitrous amonis. We are not concerned about affecting the other bacteria in the soil. And we've done a lot of different studies to see how we're affecting overall soil health. And even with an N-Serve and Instinct application, those bacteria levels are right in a what you could consider healthy zone or range, even once that application's been made.
Heather, can you expound on that just a little more in that, when you think about, you put yourself in our audience's shoes, you use anything for 50 years, you're probably gonna get resistance. I mean, look at our herbicides, insecticides, fungicides. How does nitropyrin affect nitrous amonis specifically, and why is it still effective today? Kind of goes on with that, keeping that healthy aspect there.
Yeah, it's a great point. So how we affect that one bacteria is we simply say we put that bacteria into a stasis. So we are not using a rate that's even remotely killing that bacteria. We are kind of putting it in a dormant state. In a way, we're kind of pulling the spark plugs out for a time, but it's a rate that is sufficient in that, because here's the thing is we need to continue using this product year in, year out. So we haven't even eliminated that bacteria population, which that's not even what we're trying to do. We want to put it into stasis, into dormancy for a period of time to protect that nitrogen. And that population rate is active again once that active ingredient in N-Serve and Instinct break down. And that's why we continue to need to use this product year in and year out, but also that we see it continuing to be effective at the rate we're using. Anything to add there, Eric, that I missed?
No, I think that's really important. You know, we talk about changing modes of action, and this one works very different than like a glyphosate or a
Yes.
insecticide, where we're actually controlling something, putting a lot of selection pressure on a population. So that's a great point. Kind of going back to the Y drop here. The question is, what rate would you run in a Y drop? And can you maybe address maybe if that's a program or if it's a one pass? Kind of talk about the different scenarios there a little bit, Heather, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah. So, standard with N-Serve and Instinct, our rate in the spring, we recommend our full rate is 1 quart of N-Serve or 24 ounces of Instinct NXTGEN. So when you think about a Y drop application, if that's, let's say, if that's the application that the majority of your nitrogen is going to be applied, I would still absolutely recommend that full rate. So we say kind of a good rule of thumb is we want to be stabilizing our largest or our earliest nitrogen application. So if that is your largest, that's where I think you could really see a benefit from a full rate of either of those products. If you get a little bit later into season, or this is part of a nitrogen program of a split app and it's about half your nitrogen, that's where we could talk about maybe bumping down to a half or a 3/4 rate. So much depending on how much nitrogen maybe you're putting out and really when in season.
Folks, again, if you've got any other questions, if you have some around the stabilizers, we'll be happy to take them here in the next section. But I think we're going to go ahead and kind of move on to our corn program approach. And I think, Dennis, you're going to kind of talk to us a little about some of the herbicides and things for growers to be thinking about for their weed control program.
You bet. Yep. Thanks, Eric. So we're going to go through some herbicide discussion here on both corn and soybeans. And we're going to start here with corn. And if you look at this chart here in front of you, corn application timing, when you look at this, I'd start kind of in the bottom left of this with our full-time Keystone brands. A lot of our herbicides that we put on pre are acetochlor based. And we see acetochlor performing very well out in the field over the past few years. So we have a lot of acetochlor based products in full-time and Keystone, Surpass, and Sure Start. So that's where you start with your solid herbicide program. If you move up there a little bit, you see some of our older products that are still used widely. Really good results with these. We still sell a lot of Accent, Steadfast, and Realm Q across the geography. The two products we're going to talk about a little bit more here is Kyber and Resicore. Those are both 3 mode of action products, are premium products, really solid options there. One of the things you'll see on this slide is in list 1. You'll see that on corn. A lot of you are familiar with that in soybeans. But in list 1, as we move forward and our seed partners are releasing more Vorseed Enlist and PowerCore Enlist products, you're going to be able to use Enlist 1 in your corn on those products. And that's going to be really key to battling some of these tough weeds post-emerge. And then, of course, in the upper right, we've got our full gamut of fungicides to protect that yield. So Forcevo is a new 3 mode of action product we're releasing this year. And then Approach and Approach Premium have been around for a while, and they're still very reliable and very great options to protect that yield later on in the fall. So talking a little bit more in detail on Resicore REV. This is a product that has 3 modes of action. We've got the acetochlor in there for that really good soil residual. We have mesotrione in there, which is Callisto, which brings another, not only can that burn down some weeds, but it also has some soil activity. And then we have the stinger in there, which also brings a really nice option for some of those emerged weeds. So really solid, proven, powerful weed control. That acetochlor in there is encapsulated, so that brings more crop safety for those post-emerge applications. The other thing about Resicore REV that's really nice is if you notice on the last slide, the application window is really wide. So this one we can use early on as a pre-merge, and it has that tank mix capability with things like UAN and ATS. So very, very friendly from a standpoint of tank mix with fertilizers and other herbicides. And then that application window on this one is really wide. So again, all the way from pre-merge to 24-inch tall corn. So very flexible, wide application window on Resicore REV. Kyro is another 3 mode of action product. So similar to Resicore REV, we just pull out the mesotrione in this one, and we put in tepramazone or Impact. And that is it's a novel formulation, really strong post-weed control. With that Impact in there, you get a little more activity on grasses. So this one's a little bit more common in areas that grow non-GMO or seed corn where you can't use the glyphosate. Really wide application window from emergence all the way up to 24-inch tall corn, and really excellent crop safety again with that encapsulated acetylchlor in there. So another nice option here for that corn acre. This next picture here is from Columbia, Missouri, where you can see Resicore REV, 2 quarts pre, followed by Kyro at 45 ounces and atrazine and glyphosate, which are common post-emerge tank mix partners. And we see that untreated area there. This is a very, very, very weedy plot. And you can see the Resicore followed by Kyro did a really good job managing those weeds in that plot. So that kind of wraps up the corn program summary. Anything to add, Heather or Eric?
I'll just add that, with all the different products that Dennis went over, we've got a really robust performance line with a fit for every acre. And so whether that's low, medium, high tier, I think we're going to find a good fit for you. So you can have a lot of confidence that these products are going to perform for you in 2026.
And folks, we could probably spend a full hour on our corn programs. As you go from east to west, there's a lot of programs that your local sales rep or your local supportive retailer can build for you. By all means, those are your frontline defense. We just want to kind of bring to top of mind some of our key newer products. Heather, yes, we've got a lot of questions here. We had one late question, Heather, on urea. So any comments on urea dry? I'm thinking about that Instinct NXTGEN and how we can handle it with that one.
Yeah. So we do have some standard practices that we recommend when we are impregnating urea with Instinct NXTGEN. So we impregnate urea for thousands and thousands of acres. We've got our retail partners and growers that have a great experience with it. And we see some really great results with it. I think what's key is, impregnation is a little bit of an art and a science of getting that blend and that mix right with the amount of instinct that we're blending there. And so just taking into account that, possibly a little bit of drying agent might be needed depending on how many pounds you're blending and applying. But those are things I'd encourage you to get more detail, have a deeper conversation with maybe your retail partner or your local Corteva territory manager.
Great. Thank you. Dennis, the question here is really, I think, around the Kyro, the REV, in regards to the encapsulation of that acetylchlor. Does it require more rain to activate? So can you explain to the audience why we've encapsulated those products versus, say, maybe a full-time product, which is totally different encapsulation technology?
Yeah, so I think, the main reason why we've encapsulated the acetylchlor in the Resicore and the Kyro is mainly just a crop safety. So when you put those products on non-encapsulated, you will get some crop response. You get some burn on the leaves. With Resicore REV and Kyro, you don't get that burn on the leaves. I think the formulation technology that we've used has really allowed acetylchlor to be, that product that can be very crop safe and also provides the best weed control. When you look at, some of the university trials over the last few years, acetylchlor usually shows up at the top over other group 15s from a standpoint of weed control. So being able to use it in crop is, with that encapsulation technology is a very, very key aspect of it. As far as needing more rain, some of those, the encapsulation process, I think a lot of people think of it as, you know, it's inside something very sturdy, and it has to have something pretty significant to break it apart to release that chemical. And that's not exactly the case. It will, depending on the encapsulation process, a lot of the capsules will be somewhat broken open initially to give you that first, you know, initial control. And then over time, more and more chemical, as those capsules break down, more and more active ingredient is out in the soil profile to manage those emerging weeds. So I think the encapsulation technology, quite frankly, is one of the great, you know, unsung heroes of some of these acetylchlor based products that we have out in the marketplace right now, making acetylchlor, you know, very effective weed control. We're maintaining the weed control, and we're also bringing some crop safety and a lot of flexibility with that encapsulation, being able to apply it, you know, in while the crop is up and all the way up to 24 inches. So,
Yeah. You know, and once I think what you're really getting at is once that acetylchlor is outside the capsule, it takes the same amount of rainfall as a Keystone or a Sure Start, a half inch to really activate it. And it doesn't take much to get it out for those products. So now kind of along those same lines here, the question is really, how about stacking Zidua with Resicore REV? You know, it's still group 15. Is there any value in doing something like that where you have two group 15s, kind of almost like that storing approach?
I would say with acetylchlor, probably not. I think acetylchlor is a nice balance of solid weed control. It takes just the right amount of water that we usually get. And then in the trials that I see that I've put out, I see acetylchlor working really, really well and not needing a lot of help. There's some other group 15s that I think you could pair up where you might get some synergistic effects from one that's maybe really, maybe has some good activity right away, but maybe doesn't last as long. And there's some that maybe take a little bit longer to get rolling, like a Zidua. So maybe those two would complement each other. But the acetylchlor by itself, I think, still provides a really, really solid, just a broad control from application to a solid residual time frame.
Another question here is, and we tend to get this type of question, I'm going to say after a wind event or a year where we have, I'm going to call a lot of harvest loss out there, but where we have enlist corn. Can you talk about it using Assure 2 in enlist corn to really take out those volunteers that are non-enlist?
Yep. So Assure 2 is a great product. I've had it out in some plots where I've used it to kill volunteer corn, and it works great. The one thing that I would say is that, you know, there can be some antagonism depending on which tank mix you're putting it in. And my recommendation is just to use the higher rate of Assure 2, which I believe is 12 ounces. I'd have to double check the label, but when I've gone out with that rate, even mixed with, say, a enlist and a normal standard post pass, I see great control of volunteer corn. The last thing you want to do is go out there with a lighter rate and make the corn sick or maybe not totally kill it. And then it's really tough to get it killed when you do that. So if you need to do that with Assure 2, you know, if you're trying to kill some volunteer corn out there that's non-enlist and you have enlist corn planted, definitely use that higher rate of Assure 2, and I think you'll be really happy with the results.
Dennis, I know when we talk about our corn killers out there, is there any additives that need to make sure that's in the tank?
Yeah, I mean, I generally, you know, in corn, I recommend running crop oil with that, just to make sure you're getting that spread across the leaf. You want to get that herbicide in the plant, and the way to do that is get that spread across the leaf. That's generally what I recommend in corn. We're going to talk about soybeans here in a little bit, and I bump up to MSO on soybeans almost exclusively when we go with soybeans.
So we've got a question here. Someone's been listening, which is awesome. If we use Enlist 1 on both corn and soybeans, aren't we just really kind of speeding up resistance? So talk about the differences, if you will, with Dennis or Heather, on how are you promoting Enlist 1 in corn versus a soybean crop?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people, when they think about resistance, they go back to the late 90s and early 2000s when we had glyphosate. And glyphosate was kind of a miracle. The Roundup Ready crops were, it was crazy how good the weed control was. And it was very simple. But if you remember back then, we were using we were using Roundup in beans, Roundup in corn, and we really weren't using much else. I mean, some of the soybeans were just getting Roundup once, Roundup twice, and then you had a clean field. Today, we're using a lot of multiple modes of action. So when we're out spraying, say, Enlist 1 on soybeans, we almost always have, something else in the tank, obviously glyphosate and glufosinate. When we're out there in corn, same deal. We have something else in the tank. And a lot of times when you add up, say, a corn and soybean rotation and you add up all the different active ingredients in there, you might have 6 or 8 different modes of action or sites of action across those 2 years. Where, when we created the glyphosate resistant issue, man, there was like maybe 2 or 3 at the most, back in those days. So it wasn't a very wide spectrum of sites of action and modes of action we were using back then. Whereas today, when we deploy herbicides, we're deploying a lot more tank mix partners, a lot different chemistries pre versus post. So it's obviously we don't promote Enlist 1 all by itself out there. We always recommend it with a tank mix partner, and we always recommend pre-emerge products, which are a lot different than the Group 4s, which is where Enlist 1 lands.
Heather, as we kind of were talking through here, and I was thinking, we talk about Acetochlor a lot. We talk about our HPPDs. You're in that Indiana market. I know you all got ragweed as tall as combines. In the tough years, they cut it for cordwood. Why do we have Stinger out there? What's Stinger really mean for you all out there in Indiana as you go east?
It's a great question. Stinger is something that is really unique to Resicore. And we're one of the only premixes really that has Stinger in there. And sometimes I hear from growers that they think there's a little bit of a synergistic effect between all 3 of those active ingredients in the tank. But Stinger gives us that control of that larger seeded broadleaf. Sometimes that we maybe lose focus on when we're so focused on water hemp and our small seeded broadleaves where we really need a punch with the Acetochlor and the meso. But Stinger sometimes, I think, really shines just because it is really unique to our product line. So great control of those large seeded broadleaves.
Well, folks, we've got another question come in, but I think I'm going to save that for the soybean program approach. I think it'll tie in real nice here as well as corn. Dis, let's go ahead and take it away.
You bet. So we're going to spend the next few minutes here talking about soybeans. Similar conversation on corn. If you start in the bottom left of this chart, you're going to see a lot of our pre-emerge products here. Enlighten and Vive been around for a while, as well as Sonic. So they've been kind of our mainstays in the pre-market. A couple new products we're going to talk about here is Kyber Pro and Sonic Boom. So multiple modes of action again, really solid residual, and to help widen out that post-emerge application window. As you move up the chart here, you're going to see Inversa. Inversa is an encapsulated Acetochlor that's going to replace Everprex as our overlapping residual partner in that post-emerge pass with Enlist 1. So Inversa, just like we were talking about encapsulated Acetochlor and corn programs, we have Inversa as encapsulated Acetochlor in our soybean programs, and it's a really nice overlapping residual product that we can put in with the Enlist 1. The Enlist 1, again, you can see up there, very wide application window all the way up to R1. It's a great product that stays where it needs to stay. It battles those tough to control weeds, and it's a very very widely used product now in the marketplace. And then as you look in the upper right, you can see again our wide offering of fungicides. Approach Prima. Viatude is a product that is specific for soybeans that controls a lot of different diseases, but it also is kind of a kingpin in the white mold market. So really helps control and mitigate the issues and the yield implications that white mold can bring. Forcevo, again, is a new product. We talked about that on corn. It is also labeled for soybeans. And then in the upper right, I'll mention real quick, we have some insecticide options that bring something a little bit different than just plain old, running just, bifenthrins out there. If you have aphid issues, Ridgeback has another mode of action that can help in some of those resistant populations we're seeing across the northern corn belt, resistant aphids. So nice option there to control insects. So going back to the herbicide discussion, Sonic Boom is a really nice addition to our lineup. It is a unique combination of 2 proven modes of action. So it has metribuzin in there and sulfentrazone. And the reason why it's unique is that it is a co-crystal. So it's put together, and what that does is it allows it to be a lot less water soluble, so it stays in the shallow soil profile, which is where a lot of our troublesome weeds emerge from, like your water hemp and pigweed type species. And that is that is also key feature, because it also prevents it from being down around where the soybean plant is trying to emerge. So it prevents the soybean plant from having to metabolize some of that pesticide as well. So really strong really long lasting residual, and it is a liquid. So that is one key point to make. It is a easy to use liquid premix product. And this is a plot here where we had a very, very weedy untreated check, and you can see the Sonic Boom Pre at 21 ounces, followed by our Ever Pre X plus Liberty, and you can see it's really solid, clean results there with that treatment. And I will say with Sonic Boom, it is a pretty wide rate range as well, so you can be flexible with it, and you can maybe tank mix other things with it. It's a nice base program to use it, and maybe use with something, something you can tank mix with it. So Kyber Pro is our premium 3 mode of action product. Again, this one also has metribuzin in it, which is a key product to have in the tank battling the water hemp and pigweed species we're dealing with. Then it has the same active ingredients that you'll find in Valor, flumioxazin, and also it has pyroxasulfone residua. So really nice 3 proven mode of action. All 3 of those products have activity against the amaranthus species and other key weeds that we deal with in soybeans. Excellent residual control. So this product, the rate range on is a pint and a half, but even at a pint, we see some really nice residual control, which gives you some flexibility for that post pass. Keep those weeds small, keep them from emerging. If they do emerge, let's keep them small. That way, when you're out there with your Enlist 1 pass, you're spraying small weeds. So it's a really nice option to have with the Enlist weed control system. So Inversa, it's a novel formulation. Again, it's an encapsulated acetylchlor, really versatile, really crop safe, and that's one of the key features of this product, to replace a product like Ever Pre X, which is an EC formulation that can cause a little bit of burn on those soybean leaves. So we don't see a lot of crop response with Inversa. Really effective weed control with that acetylchlor, and awesome crop safety. So you can see here this Columbia, Missouri trial, very weedy trial here. You can see a lot of grasses in there. Kyber Pro at 16 ounces, which is kind of our standard rate, followed by Inversa, Enlist, and Liberty. You see a very, very clean field there. If you can't see it, you can imagine in your own head. There it is. It's a very, very clean, weed-free field there. So I had some plots out last year, some Sonic Boom and some Kyber Pro and then I follow that up with a Enlist Liberty program, saw very, very solid results, just like these pictures show. So super long, super good residual with these products, which is nice when you're you don't always can't dictate when you're going to get out there with your sprayer with what Mother Nature throws at you. So it's nice having these good residual products to hopefully keep those weeds smaller and keep those fields cleaner before you can get there with your sprayer. So that's a wrap on the soybean program summary. I'm sure we have some questions to answer.
Yeah, and just remind the folks out there, use that Q&A feature. The reason I say this particular question is and I was thinking about the grass you were just talking about, Dennis. Excuse me, when you think about grass control, a sure to on Italian ryegrass. We don't see a lot of Italian ryegrass necessarily here in the north, more in the south, but what rate would you kind of typically use there for that tough to control weed?
Again, with a sure to, I think it depends on what you're putting in the tank with it. If you're going out there with a single pass solution, I always recommend the max rate on grass killers like a sure to, just because, again, if you don't get them that one trip, the odds of getting them again or having another chance at getting them is pretty slim. So I go with the max rates with grass killers when you're mixing like with an Enlist, like Enlist Liberty, Enlist glyphosate system. If you're going after those grasses, you want to make sure you're getting that weed killed and you got to do that with the highest rate possible on the label, obviously, but that's the best way to do it.
And Dennis, I think what another key aspect here is what we just saw with Kyber Pro. When you start off and you have those 3 multiple modes of actions, you start off really strong. You can really minimize a lot of that grass pressure till maybe later in the season, but we're trying to get that canopy closure specifically.
Right. Yeah.
This question was actually going back to the corn. It says they love the mesotrione, the stinger, and the resicore, but they're having some escapes post with their water hemp. And their question is there any specific formulation of dicamba? Do you like spike it in for crop safety?
A lot of folks are using the status with pretty good success. It seems like, again, the status is seeming to get maybe a few holes in it here and there. And I think we got to use some pretty high rates, and then it starts getting a little bit spendy. But that's the one that seems to be the most popular in my neighborhood to start nailing some of those escapes. But again, that water hemp is really tough. And I think where guys are finding the best success is just using those higher rates of pre-emerge products, trying to prevent those things from emerging. So, making sure you're getting up to that 3 pound of acetochlor with your strategy when you're using, like I said, let's say a Keystone followed by Rev, or a Rev followed by Kyber, or any of those type of programs. Really try to keep those weeds from emerging, because once they emerge, and we all know water hemp species are just super tough to get. Once they get any size to them at all, they're pretty tough. But statuses work. There's some people still using Clarity, Diflex and those things as well. So they all work, I think, pretty well. Just depends on, you just got to be careful, read the label, and make sure whatever situation you're in, you're staying safe and not putting the crop in any additional risk.
And I'm going to put a shameless plug in here, folks. That's the reason why we have Enlist corn.
Yeah.
When you think about really why we're trying to do in corn relative to beans, we've talked about it a little bit. We know that 75-80% of you are going to spray your Enlist soybeans each and every year. You're relying on that Enlist to do a lot of heavy lifting with glufosinate, with glyphosate. When it comes over to Enlist corn, we're really just wanting to replace out that dicamba component with Enlist 1. When you think about around that cornfield, 6.5, 7 fields are going to be Enlist E3 soybeans. It doesn't make a lot of sense to go out with some older dicambas that we know can volatilize. We use XR nozzles because we're trying to fog it down into the canopy, and then watch it just drift right out of our corn over in our beans and hurt yield. And I've never met a grower yet that likes spraying dicamba in their corn. I've asked that question every year for a decade, and no one ever has raised their hand yet that they like spraying dicamba on their corn. This is all the reasons why we really brought Enlist into Enlist corn. Not to replace everything, but as an additive effect to really give you crop safety and take that peace of mind. So, Heather, I know, over in your part of the world, what's Inversa? We talked about some of our good pre-emerge products out there, multiple modes of action, but how's Inversa really come into play in your part of the world, Indiana East, and what's it mean to your growers out there?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up, Eric, because Inversa is a great option for our post soybean residual lineup, really. And it's a great tank mix partner to add to an Enlist program in the post. And so, we've got an encapsulated acetochlor that's going to work really well for us. I feel like, in a way, it's designed for the times where we've got maybe a little bit of some drier Junes, but when we do have a rain event, it tends to be a heavier, larger rain event with multiple inches. And so that's where the encapsulation component of the Inversa, I think, we're really going to see the benefit from.
Folks, we're getting at the turn here at the top of the hour. We've got just a few minutes left. Before we close, I do want to thank Dennis and Heather both for your time today. Heather, do you have any closing comments before we move on?
Yeah, I just want to go back to the beginning of the presentation to make sure I leave you with a little reminder of thinking about before you make your nitrogen applications here this spring. I really want to urge you, if you haven't already, to consider adding N-Serve and Instinct to the tank to avoid the risk of nitrogen loss this season. We want to make every pound of nitrogen count, and we can do that with those two products.
Dennis, any closing comments from you, sir?
Yeah, I think, weed control is extremely important. As we're coming into this year, let's just make sure we're checking all the boxes on weed control, because when we try to, when if we try to skimp or do some things to save a little bit of money, we can create some problems for future years that are a little bit tougher to manage. So let's make sure we stay the course. Your local Corteva rep and your local retailers should be able to help you put a really, really solid program together to keep battling those tough weeds out there.
Folks, I also want to kind of remind everyone here, we have another in-season webinar on June 3rd, 9 o'clock a.m. Eastern. Take your phones. You can scan here the QR code to register, or you can visit us at corteva.us. You'll be able to log in there as well. I know we just had one other question that came in here, or two actually. Can the encapsulation of Inversa that really drives it off the soil, we talk about that drives to the soil, does that really affect any of the enlist or other modes of actions that could be in that tank when you think about it post-emergent in that soybean market?
We haven't seen any issues that way as far as affecting the efficacy of like Enlist or glyphosate or glufosinate or whatever your tank mix partners are. Really, the key benefit there is you're just getting that less crop response compared to like an EC formulation of like an Everpreax or any other acetylchlor that you might put in with your Enlist. So that's probably one of the key benefits. As far as any detrimental effects to the Enlist, we have not witnessed that at all.
Well, folks, we're here at the top of the hour. I'm going to just leave this QR code up. Hopefully you found this webinar helpful. I know we've got a few 30 days here maybe before we start a lot of our spring applications. I know we're starting to run fertilizer, but hopefully you've been able to find some of these topics today reassuring to what you're doing right now, or a reason to stay with what you've been doing that works. I know 2026 is going to be a challenging year. We've always had a lot of challenging years, but we do have the right tools, the right technology, and we also have the right personnel to answer those key questions. If you ever have a question out there, talk to your local supportive retailer, your Corteva sales rep. They're always there to answer any questions you might have. With that, we'll wish you all a safe and productive spring, and we'll see you all again here on June 3rd at 9 a.m. Eastern. Thank you all for joining today.